Thanks, boss. How you doing, Reed?
Hey, how you doing, Brad? We dive into Anurag's question about Living End and its sort of status and performance at Pro Tour Lord of the Rings. Living End is going to be our feature match in the feature match area in our main feature here, um, in the hands of Lee Tilford, um, Tilford Lee rather. But yeah, so Living End was actually not very well represented at the Pro Tour. I think that was a surprise to a lot of competitors. It was probably more like the eighth or ninth most popular deck, whereas some folks thought it would be a lot closer to the top. I had one teammate play Living End, that was Gabriel Nassif, and he ended up making top 16 of the tournament. We were kind of scrambling the last couple days before deck submission. A lot of folks didn't know what to play. Nothing was really felt like a home run. And at a certain point, Nassif said, "Hey, I've never had a losing set with Living End. Like I've been playing, the villain side when people need an opponent and they want to try their deck against Living End. Nobody's ever beaten me or gone better than 50-50." And we all heard him say that and we're like, wow, like that's really telling. This is a serious strong deck, especially for a player who really knows all the tricks and all the patterns for Living End. So yeah, this is one that it's not a default choice because someone just getting into Modern and looking for a new deck to pick up. Living End is really unintuitive deck in terms of piloting and knowing how it's going to work and playing around hate cards. But if you actually get someone who's played a lot and knows what to do in every matchup, it's very, very scary. So here we see what Living End is made of. It's mostly cycling creatures, the Cascade cards, and of course the namesake card Living End, which you'll cascade into every time. And the really scary thing is that in addition to Living End putting all your, crazy stuff from the graveyard at the battlefield, it's also like a Wrath of God for opposing creature decks, which is really frustrating if you're trying to bring something like Colossus Hammer or Yawgmoth uh, to the Modern tournament.
Well, we're actually about to see something super interesting here, in my opinion. That is the Rakdos deck likes to put creatures into its graveyard, and Living End is symmetrical. Now, obviously, it's going to be lopsided, given that the Living End deck will be cycling a bunch of their creatures. But how do you think this is going to play out? Are we going to see like Croaks and Griefs and Furies just ETBing from the graveyard off from Bradley Brown, or excuse me, from Bradley Brown after Tilford's Living End resolves?
It's a great question, Brad. If I'm the Rakdos player, I'm thinking plan A is let's just take Living End out of the picture. Let's make sure Tilford can't resolve the card that his deck is centered around. So I'm going to use my Thought Seizes, my Griefs to try to take it away. Sideboarded my Chalice of the Voids, all that good stuff. However, as all Magic players know, plan A doesn't always work out. So we might instead have these scrappy games where it's like, hey, I'm gonna just throw a grief into a fury into my graveyard, so that when you do Living End, I can have a little something to try to fight you and battle back. Um, I think that's more likely to work out in game number 2, where Brad might have some additional disruption, maybe some graveyard hate elements. But for the most part, I think the key cards on the Rakdos side in game 1 are going to be Thoughtseize, Grief, and probably Dothy Voidwalker.
Good observation as always. Ragavan promoted from token to legendary creature for Bradley Brown on his first turn. Makes a connection and yields a Misty Rainforest and a treasure token on turn 2. Excellent choice on Swamps, Bradley. I like Portal. What do you think we're going to do with this 3 mana?
Well, Dothy Voidwalker is probably the most exciting card because that has the built-in graveyard hate element. Looks like Brad has, wow, turn 2 Blood Moon. That is no joke.
That is an Altered Blood Moon. Tilford gets to fetch once in response here, so he's going to cycle Street Wraith first.
the card that Tilford really wants to have against this Blood Moon is Generous Ent, which can forest cycle for the remaining basic forest. I imagine he will use Scalding Tarn for Island in response, although he may also just choose to fight over this with Force of Negation.
Force of Negation it is. We're going to exile one of the blue cards and fetch out. Possibly. Now, if you're Tilford, do you go for a basic here thinking, oh my gosh, what if he has a second one? Or do you just go ahead and grab a Shockland?
Well, if I had a creature that I want to cycle this turn, like I think I caught a glimpse of Architects of Will in Tilford's hand, then I would probably go for an untapped land, either in the form of basic island or the steam vents. But I would not be so scared of Blood Moon that I would be scared off of fetching for a Triome if I thought that was going to set up my mana a little bit better.
Sure. Steam vents it is. And we cycled Architects of Will. The Shardless Agent was exiled to the Force of Negation. Turn 2 for Tilford Lee. A lot has happened in the first 2 turns.
Yeah, big action. Turn 1 Ragavan on the play is just what Bradley wants to give him a fighting chance in game number 1, the pre-board game, which is usually the least favorable one against Living End.
Somebody in chat says that these guys know each other. They play each other at an LGS.
Oh, that's interesting. Love to hear that. By the way, both these players 8-1, and we know from watching our previous rounds feature match that there are no perfect records remaining in the tournament. So 8-1 is right up there, top of the standings. You know, maybe table 2, table 3.
Ragavan's second connection yields another Shardless Agent.
So it would be funny to see Shardless Agent just played the old-fashioned way to cascade into whatever the top of the library delivers. Bradley actually does not have the requisite colored mana to play that Shardless Agent, though, so we're not going to see that.
I believe he should have 2 treasure. No, he used 1 on the Blue Moon. Excuse me. Waker of Waves was cycled on Bradley's turn. Tilford down to 8 after fetch. Ragavan's looking kind of scary now. I mean, it's always been kind of scary, but it's like extra scary at this point.
Although the 3 mana mark is the crucial one, and with Rakdos, a deck that doesn't have much in the way of counter spells or instant speed interaction, I think we're pretty likely to see Living End resolve here and put Tilford in the driver's seat.
You are correct. Living End cascaded 2 from a Shardless Agent. Let's see how much power this puts on the battlefield. Architects of Will has a trigger. We're going to resolve that first. So that's Generous, Ent, Waker of Waves, Street Wraith, and Architects. What's Waker's power? Seven.
You know, sometimes the food token from Generous Ent actually makes a difference, especially Living End is a deck that deals itself a lot of damage, so sometimes you'll see situations like this where they combo off at a single-digit life total, but having the combination of a big old reach creature plus 3 points of life gain from the food can be just what the doctor orders to put you out of reach.
So they're lethal on the battlefield, but Bradley Brown flashed in Orcish Bowmasters to put 2 blockers in. Is Tilford worried about anything from Rakdos Evoke at this point?
No, you know, it would be a flurry of Bowmasters and Lightning Bolts. Maybe Croxa in game number 1 to steal it, but I think realistically the position is strong enough for Tilford that there's going to be nothing left to do in this game but scoop up the cards.
Okay. We're just thought seizing for a little additional information. And a Fury. Exiling Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This is going to buy a little time. But the Waker of Waves and the Generosent are big.
Right. So the best Bradley could hope for is to have an Undying Evil or Undying Malice, Undying Evil. I always get these mixed up, but one of those scam cards to bring back the Fury. Then he'll get to distribute 8 points of damage plus have a tapped 4/4 double strike. And yeah, I mean it's not nothing, but he's still gonna have to settle in for a very painful attack and do some chump blocking with the Bowmasters.
Well, we did have a scam card. We took out the Street Wraith because it can't be blocked, and we took out the 3/3 because it was free food for the Fury. And now we see Waker of Waves, Generosent, Shardless Agent, staring at a pair of 1/1s, but a pretty healthy life total in 17.
Funny that the Waker of Waves actually so relevant against the 4/4 Fury, because changing the 4/4 double strike into a 3/4 double strike. Waker of Waves or Generosent.
7 being the magic number. Boy, those are some good cyclers. Wizards has not been hesitant to print good cyclers the last few years. Here come the big boys. Shardless Agent's going to stay home just in case. Token eats it. Brown's going to take presumably 5. Down to 12. Tilford's got a hand of Force of Negation and a couple of black cards, probably cyclers.
Yeah, those are Street Wraiths, which he ideally does not want to cycle to further lower his life total. I want to point out the food token. So what looks like 7 is actually kind of more like 10. I also want to point out the Waker of Waves shrinking the Fury. So it's a little trickier for Bradley to kill Tilford than it might look just from what we're seeing on the battlefield.
Brown got frisky with the Fury, and Shardless Agent hit the graveyard for Lee. You're right, he was not going to cycle the Street Race, but he did pop the food. Street Wraith exiled for Grief. Grief comes in and nabs Brown's last card, which was a Thoughtseize.
So the players fully know the score here, and it's just a matter of making the best decision in terms of the racing math, in terms of what might come off the top. But Tilford decides to attack with both and give Bradley the smallest number of remaining draw steps possible, which I like, especially given the Force of Negation in hand. You don't have to worry about something like a Lightning Bolt or a Terminate.
All right, 2 big guys coming in. Fury into the bin.
Yeah, and I love that the Waker of Waves -1/-0 just actually being relevant there.
We're going to show our last card, but pack it up. Tilford takes the first game.
Yeah, really showing off the strength of Living End. Now, one thing I like to say about this, if you're a fan of Bradley Brown, is this is sort of according to plan. You normally expect the Living things equalize once you're able to bring in all of your hate off of the sideboard. For a moment, it looked like Brad might actually steal that one with the turn 1 Ragavan on the play and the quick Blood Moon, but in the end, it was Tilford Lee in the Living End deck doing what it is wont to do.
Let's talk about sideboards, Reed. What are we doing here? Does Bradley Brown have significant graveyard hate, or was he just going to lean on Voidwalkers?
So the industry standard 2 copies of Chalice of the Void plus additional 9. Oh, wow. Correction, 3 copies of Chalice of the Void. The nuclear option here coming very well prepared. Additionally, 2 copies of Nile Spell Bomb. After that, we come to marginal options that he might turn to or might not turn to, things like Children the Apocalypse, Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, Hidetsugu Consumes All, which is technically Graveyard Hate, although it's very, very slow version of Graveyard Hate that sometimes even kills your own Ragavans. I could take this opportunity to address a really, really good question that came from chat. Do people tend to board in Leyline of the Void against Rakdos Scam? So the question is sometimes, or the answer is sometimes. It's a really controversial one that some people like to do and some people don't. Um, what I'll add about this particular matchup is that Leyline of the Void is sometimes just a good card out of Living End against the opponent, because what happens is when the games get scrappy, you have to use grief on your opponent. You have to maybe kill some of their creatures. Maybe you have to Living End multiple times. If you have a Leyline of the Void, it means your opponent never, ever, ever gets to return anything when you resolve Living End. So it kind of makes it even more powerful than normal, and makes it very much a one-sided effect. So I would not be shocked to see Tilford reach for, possibly a small number of ley lines. Like, there's no rule that says it has to be 0 or 4. You can totally board in 2 Leyline of the Voids if you decide that that's what's best and that's what you have room for, and or that you don't necessarily want to draw multiples.
Back in the day, I used to play the Jund Living End deck. This is many years ago, and it played
Demonic
Living End.
Dread.
Yes, sir. And it played Quad Leyline of the Void in the main deck, mostly because Affinity was really good and they could sack all their creatures in response to Living End. But it always felt at home when I played it then. It's more of a sideboard option now, but I feel like the Living End deck could afford to play some.
Yeah, by the way, I'll let everyone know that Tilford does have access to 4 ley lines in the sideboard, but it's a mix of ley lines. It's not all Leyline of the Void. Is 2 Sanctity and 2 Voids, which any number of those could come in if he likes. I suspect once you've decided to put Leyline of Sanctity in your deck, it's probably because you want to bring it in against Rakdos Evoke to stop those Thought Seizes and Griefs, and it even does a number against Nile Spellbomb.
All right, so Living End takes game 1. That's not unusual. It's games 2 and 3 that are harder with all the the sideboard hate, right, Reed?
Correct. Yeah, this is going to be the game with Bradley Brown's greatest advantage, where he has all the sideboard cards and gets to go first.
All right, boys, let's see some magic happen.
What's my opinion about this? About who's favored in this matchup? Well, certainly after Tilford has successfully won game 1, I would be betting on the Living End player. But I think the matchup's close, and as I mentioned, usually the way you expect it to go is Living End's gonna be a heavy favorite in game number 1, and then Rakdos will be a favorite in an individual sideboard game, but not necessarily a favorite to win the whole best 2 out of 3 match. But that's just a long way of saying very close.
Here we go. Both players looking at a grip of 7. I see lands and spells in both players' hands. Will they say that it's enough?
So what Bradley has is a Thoughtseize and a Nile Spellbomb. So that's something, that's a configuration of cards you have to be really happy with against a graveyard-based combo deck. However, what he's missing is a way to pressure the opponent. So he would love a Ragavan, a Dothy Voidwalker, a Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, whatever it might be. As it is, he's probably just going to play out some disruption and then, see what happens from there, and hopefully not give the opponent too much time to set up or rebuild.
Both players kept their 7s. Bradley said that's good enough. I've got a Thoughtseize and a sideboard card and Faith in the top of my deck. We're going to fetch Shock Thoughtseize. And then Brown's going to wish he had a Death Shadow in his hand. He does not. Here we go. Thoughtseize, my favorite card to resolve on camera because we get to see all the cards.
Pretty classic Living End hand, 3 lands, 1 copy of Living End actually in the hand, which that's not that good. That won't be taken with the Thoughtseize. then you see a Cascade card and 2 Cyclers. So, um, at the default here would be Bradley Brown taking away the Shardless Agent, though since he has Nile Spellbomb, maybe you could convince yourself to take Street Wraith or something like that to stop Tilford from seeing more cards.
What do you think of Tilford not cycling the Street Wraith in response? Do you think he should have done that, or what's your opinion on that?
That's a really good play from Tilford to not cycle in response, because as long as you don't think Bradley is going to take the Street Wraith itself, what you do is you protect information, and you also protect any powerful card that you might cycle into. So, as the Thoughtseize player, you want to resolve your Thoughtseize with the most possible information and the most possible number of valid options of what you can take. And by keeping the Straight Wraith in hand, basically the result is Bradley Thoughtseizes and sees a face down unknown card in the slot of that Street Wraith. So less information, with which to sculpt the game plan.
Excellent. Well, Brown took his second turn deploying a Nile Spellbomb, sideboard All-Star, and Fury with a Feign Death effect.
Yeah, very cool play there. Like Fury just to kill nothing, 8 damage going to waste. But hey, a 4/4 double strike, that is a very, very real clock.
For just cycling and fetching, as Living End often does. Going to second turn for Tilford. Tilford looking at the board, wondering, how did this happen?
Yeah, so what we might wind up seeing a couple turns from now is a Living End just being played straight into the Nile Spellbomb. And what that would mean is that Tilford's not going to get any creatures back from his graveyard, but it will just be a way to deal with the Fury. That extra mode of Living End as wiping the opponent's creatures off the battlefield.
Bradley's turn 3 is an attack, a swamp, and a pass. Tilford's going to cycle. No surprise there. Curator of Mysteries in the yard. Now, leaning into that play that you were just describing about Living In for no value, how do you feel about Tilford cycling these creatures right now?
Well, I really love the way Tilford is navigating. If you'll notice, this is the first time he's cycling a Street Wraith. So waiting till the last possible moment there, because what you can do if you have Street Wraith is you can cast Shardless Agent, Cascade into Living End, put that card in the stack. Then Bradley will Nile Spellbomb you. You let that resolve, exile your graveyard, but still in response to Living End, that's when you cycle all your Street Wraiths and wind up having something to bring back. But that's not how it plays out this time. After the Thoughtseize on Shardless Agent, it looked like Tilford just never found another Cascade card, and the Fury actually went totally to town there. So things lining up quite favorably for Bradley Brown.
The old 1-2 punch from the Fury. We're going to go to game 3. Tilford on the play has to be happy about that.
Yeah, most definitely. Extra turn to cycle things. The ability to cast your Living End before you have to worry about something like Blood Moon.
Pretend you're Bradley Brown in this position, and we're thinking about our mulligan decisions. What do you need? Do you need a sideboard card, or is something like Grief and Thoughtseize going to be enough?
Yeah, I would say Grief and Thoughtseize count. So I'm not going to keep a 7-card hand that doesn't have any disruption. And by disruption, we're talking about Thoughtseize, Grief, Chalice of the Void, Nile Spellbomb, and maybe Dothy Voidwalker. Although a hand that does nothing on turn 1 and then turn 2 Dothy Voidwalker, that might be even a little bit slow. So I'm gonna say like basically auto mulligan if none of the cards mentioned appear in the opening hand. But that doesn't mean you auto keep if you see one, because you want to have a mix of disruption plus a reasonable clock and just something to make life a little bit difficult on the living end player.
Sure thing. Let's take a look at these opening hands. Tilford on the play, so he'll get to choose first. I see some lands. I see a Street Wraith. Some cycling creatures.
I think that's a Leyline of the Void shuffled to the front.
It
So
is.
we were wondering if that card was going to come in. Now we have our answer.
We have pre-game actions in Leyline of the Void and a turn 1 land.
You love that if you're Tilford too, getting to keep a 7-card hand that has a Leyline. The more like kind of middle of the road outcome with a Leyline is that you mulligan down to 6 or 5. Then you have the Leyline. You're like, do I even want to keep this, or do I want to put it on the bottom so that I can have more resources to work with? But this is just the best of all worlds of having lands, a Leyline, lots of cycling stuff.
It's scam protection is what it is. That's what the Leyline of the Void is. We're looking at a Thoughtseize out of Bradley Brown into 2 Generous and Street Wraith and Waker Waves.
Yeah, just for perspective, Tilford may have won game 2 if he had had a Leyline of the Void, because Bradley's draw was really, really dependent on that Feigned Death Grief, or Feigned Death Fury.
Chalice of Void for X equals 0. Both players with powerful sideboard cards now on the battlefield on turn 1. We got a battle, Reed. We got a slugfest. What's going on here?
Yeah, so this is both players with their really potent sideboard cards kind of neutralizing each other's best draws and settling in for a little bit more of a slog. It's a little early to make this call, but it's not out of the question in a game like this that the living end player could just get up to 4, 5, 6 mana and start casting creatures.
Yes, the honest method. Looks like we got raided by Gabriel Nassif's stream, so that's cool. Welcome, everyone. You're watching a local event out of Tacoma, Washington, just south of Seattle.
Yeah, welcome to all Yellow Hat people. You guys are coming in at exactly the right moment. We are in round number 2 of the Modern 20K headliner. We're really just hitting our stride as we get to those deciding rounds that are going to shape out our top 8.
Indeed. Turn 2 for Tilford was land pass. We're going over to Brown now, who's fetching with the Bloodstained Mire. Leyline of the Void on the battlefield versus Chalice of the Void on the battlefield. Just staring each other down. It is a standoff. Long time ago, people used to complain that Modern was all about sideboard cards. Do you still feel that way, Reed?
That is certainly a quality of Modern when compared to a format like Standard or, of course, Limited, where the sideboard cards tend to be a little bit less focused and less impactful. Now, whether you consider that a feature or a bug is going to depend on you as a player, or perhaps what deck you enjoy playing most. But my experience is that, yeah, like Chalice of the Void is really good against Living End. Yes, Leyline of the Void can be really good against Rakdos Evoke, but it's not like a one-punch knockout. It's more, if you have these cards in the context of a good hand and they happen to match up nicely against the opponent's draw, that's when they seem really, really potent. But I have not found Modern to be a simplistic format where it's like, yeah, I mulligan to my sideboard card and that determined the outcome of the game.
There we
I
go.
will point out here that a nice little side effect of Leyline of the Void is it means that Nihil Spellbomb can never hit the graveyard and can never draw Bradley a card.
That is a subtle interaction, but important one. Now, Spellbomb out of Bradley Brown prompts a fetch and a cycling of Architects of Will from Tilford Lee. Tilford at 15, Brown at 17. This game's had a real explosive turn 1, and we're still getting going. We're still spinning our wheels a little bit, but it's about to change. Turn 3 is Bloodstained Mire. Is that a Blood Moon in Brown's hand?
I actually can't can't get too much of a glimpse. From context clues, I'm wondering what Bradley's hand looks like. Like, did he keep on the strength of some kind of evoke, feign death type draw and get shut down by Leyline of the Void? Doesn't seem like that. It seems like he just has a good mix of stuff. Thoughtseize, Chalice of the Void, Nile Spellbomb, Dothy Voidwalker. These are all individually some of the best cards in the matchup. So, um, it doesn't seem like he's necessarily been hurt all that badly by the ley line, at least not so far.
Voidwalker's got some very important text on it. That makes 3 problematic permanents for Tilford Lee. Tilford's 4th turn is a fetch land and a pass, and we are at the bluffing phase of, oh yeah, none of those things mean much. I'll just pretend. Just pretend that those things don't exist. We're going to go back to Brown. Brown fetched end step for a Blood Crypt. Taking our 4th turn. Finally going to draw blood the honest way. Grief Hardcast.
Yep, I like how Bradley's doing this before combat. Wow, that's just a full whiff on the grief.
Oof.
Yeah, really poor hand for Tilford. Although the one card I do want to point out there is Otawara Soaring City. So if he does find a Cascade card, he can bounce the Chalice of the Void. There's still a long way to go before he can actually make anything meaningful happen, because remember, there's the Nile Spellbomb. But if he can bounce Chalice, put a Living End on the stack, force Bradley to use the Nile Spellbomb, it will at least have the outcome of killing off those 2 creatures from Brad and resetting the game back to nothing against nothing.
I mentioned a second ago that Tilford was bluffing. Well, he can't bluff anymore. 4 lands in hand. Down to 11 after this fetch. Staring down. Daithy Voidwalker, Grief, Nile Spellbomb, Chalice of the Void. This guy's work cut out.
Yeah, so it seems to me like Tilford is going to need to find a Cascade card in his next 2 draws so that he can make the play I just mentioned of end of turn, Otawara the Chalice, and then untap and Cascade. And he actually did draw Shardless Agent, so I think he's going to settle in, take one more big hit for 6, and then we're going to see an action turn of some kind.
Hope so. That'll make a better game. Bradley Brown takes his 5th turn. Knows 3 cards in Tilford's hand out of the 4. Attack step. And now, if you're Bradley, are you going to commit anything else to the battlefield here, or are you satisfied?
There's really no need to, because you already are presenting a lethal attack, and at this point you start to think about what are the ways that Tilford can get back into this game. A single blocker doesn't do it, because Dothy Voidwalker has Shadow and Grief has Menace. So unless Tilford's deploying a shadow creature of his own, blocking is not going to be an option.
Otawara bounces Chalice of the Void end of turn just to make that play you mentioned earlier of Living End to get rid of your guys.
Okay, so Shardless Agent has been cast. Now we're going to see the Cascade. Living End is put onto the stack. What will Bradley Brown do? He responds with Nile Spellbomb. He can't. That's not a legal play to draw that card because of the Leyline of the Void. So I'm not sure if we can influence the match, but that is something that I would try to get corrected if I was down there and able to speak to a judge.
Yeah. Mistakes have been made. Orcish Bowmasters flashed in.
Interesting, by the way, Tilford could have cycled this Curator of Mysteries after the Nihil Spellbomb resolved. And then that would have been brought back by... Oh, I'm sorry. He can't do that because the Dothy Voidwalker was still on the battlefield.
Correct. Yeah. Voidwalker was saying, nah. Bowmasters pings Tilford to 4, puts a couple of 1/1s onto the battlefield.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of moving pieces in this in this matchup, and this is what I mean about the living end players having to recognize all these patterns and the subtle timing and playing around sideboard cards. It really is a lot, and I greatly respect a player like Tilford who's able to put up such impressive results with living end.
Yeah, especially since his draws have not been super kind to him this game. Bradley's been in the lead for the entire game until now. We're going to try to finish off Tilford with a 4-card hand, going to turn 6.
So this is redeploying the Chalice for 0, which was bounced by Otawara. But, if you're Tilford, I think you've entered the I'm just casting my creatures stage of the game, starting with this Curator of Mysteries, presumably.
Breaker Waves cost. What's its actual mana cost?
Blue 2. Waker of Waves is blue 5, so total of 7. I think the only cards that Tilford can't cast are the black ones, so like Grief, Architects of Will, that type of thing.
Maybe Brown will play an Urborg.
Yeah, sometimes you'll see a small number of Sunken Ruins in these living end decks.
All right, so Curator Mysteries coming down the normal way. Met with a fetch from a Bloodstained Mire. I do want to let chat know we are aware of the mistake, but we are on a small delay, so we could not have fixed it in time. Bradley's just thinning his deck and taking the time to tank. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think we're down to a good old-fashioned top deck battle because Tilford Lee's life total is quite low, but from what we're seeing, the Bowmasters have a hard time attacking into the 4/4 and the 2/2. Maybe not, maybe a hard time, but not impossible.
Bold move from Bradley Brown, sending some 1/1s into a 2/2 and a 4/4.
Oh no! So Bradley walked in to this block hoping that he could feign death his Orcish Bowmasters, but he shook his own head. Just totally blanked on the Leyline of the Void.
I thought he had a Fury, but I was wrong.
And yeah, this is for those wondering about Leyline of the Void against Rakdos Evoke, this is my experience with it. Is the thing that we all know is you use the ley line to stop their nut draw of turn 1, Grief or Fury plus Feign Death. But also, sometimes the games go long and the Rakdos deck has 6 copies of Feign Death and Undying Evil. They just draw them as the game goes long, and they can't make plays like the one Bradley Brown was just going for with Feign Death on Bowmasters.
Tilford did his penance and had to draw 5 lands in a row, but his last 3 draws have been quite good. That's Foundation Breaker, Curator Mysteries coming in, punching Bradley Brown's face.
Holy smokes, that is Tilford Lee with Living End advancing to 9-1. What a cool match. We got to see kind of every element of the matchup on Showcase there.
Yeah, and it was back and forth. It really looked like Bradley Brown was going to take it for a long time in that game.
So Tilford Lee inching closer to top 8. We're not ready to predict exactly what kind of record you need, but somewhere in the 10-11 wins range is what I'm expecting our top 8 competitors to finish with.
Yeah, somebody in chat said how many entrants to the event? Originally 328. About 50 made the cut to day 2. We have 7 minutes left in the round. It's unusual for us to not go to time. We've had a lot of going to time matches lately. How do you feel about today's tournament so far, Reed?
I'm loving it. I mean, there's so much exciting behind the scenes stuff with the MXP event. being on this particular weekend. So, number one, we have the recent release of Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth, bringing super powerful cards like the One Ring, like Orcish Bowmasters, like Delighted Halfling, and hey, the land cycling creatures, which we just saw on Showcase in the Living End deck. Number two is we have the Pro Tour results. So modern under the competitive microscope, like well, it's always a heavily played competitive format, but the Pro Tour players turning their sights to it is something that we don't see all that often. So that's cool. How are the MXP players evaluating and one-upping the results of the Pro Tour? And then finally, we have the unbanning of Preordain, which we've seen some cool decks, including Is It Prowess, Grixis Death Shadow, Is It Tempo, 4-color control, utilizing Preordain to good effect. And yeah, we still have a few rounds left to go to see who can answer these questions the best in terms of processing all this new information.
This is round 2 of 5 today in the Swiss, and then there will be a cut to the top 8. Reed will be back at that time. While these players are shuffling up, we see Michael Lee on Team of Rhinos up a game over Benny Zeoli with 4-color Omnath. Looks like Benny's also representing the multicolored shirt.
I love it.
This deck.
Yeah, so if memory serves, we saw Michael Lee in one of our first couple of rounds yesterday, winning on camera with Team of Rhinos. So having converted that 1-0 start up to 7-2, props to Michael Lee, and happy to see him again on camera. Now, the first question I always look at when we see a 4-color Omnath deck on camera is what does the version look like? Because we've seen quite a range of takes on this archetype. I would describe Benny's as the most sort of classic version. He's got Delighted Halfling. He's got more of a tap-out style of deck, just hoping to slam these powerful planeswalkers and value creatures.
Before we get started really quick, I'm going to address chat because they asked me a question. Can you tell me about your wall art? That is a poster of old Magic cards. That was a promotional item sent to stores in 1995.
1995. Wow, very cool.
All right. So, off to the races. Game 2. Michael starts with... Benny starts with the fetch land. Michael also starts with the fetch land. 4-color Omnath, opting for a Triome. No mysteries there. Love the 1-card cut.
Okay. Michael Lee, by the way, was a top 8 competitor from the previous MXP event in Oakland. So going for back-to-back.
Excellent. Turn 2 for Benny is a Shockland deployed tapped.
And cool. By the way, we should mention that we're coming into this backup feature match in game number 2. Michael Lee has won the first one. These Cascade decks, they are very, very strong game 1 decks. And this is part of the reason we see almost every competitor packing 2 or more copies of Chalice of the Void, is you just know you need to do something to flip the script on the Cascade players after you go to sideboard.
Both players with a breeding pool and a Triome.
Benny's actually packing 3 Chalice of the Void, in addition to a couple of well-placed permission spells and 1 Hallowed Moonlight. So pretty well prepared for the matchup going into sideboarding. Also for main deck Teferi Time Ravelers, which is one of the best cards against these Cascade decks all the time. Hey, wow, Benny also made top 8 in Oakland. So that's really something that's pretty cool to see 2 competitors making this deeper run and battling it out.
I wonder if they played each other there.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised.
So Teferi Time Raveler countered. follow-up is a Shardless Agent. We're going to get to take a peek at some cards. I saw that Mutavault. We talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, Mutavault, in addition to just being a nice value land, also pairs really well with Flame of Anor, which some of these Cascade players are choosing to use in their sideboard.
Lee with 10 power on the battlefield. Benny with 4 lands and a 1 ring.
Holy cow, Michael Lee with the double Force of Negation on back-to-back turns.
Oof.
And this is just the nightmare scenario when you face Teamer Rhinos is you have a couple of meaningful cards, they get countered, and you just get pounded by the massive trample creatures.
And they get Zeoli down to 7 life, facing lethal. Wondering if Michael Lee has a 3rd Force of Negation. Says Omnath, and that is that Mystical Dispute?
Oh no. Wow. This is gonna be Benny potentially resolving 0 spells.
Oh my
Oh
goodness.
man, you just feel for the guy. In a game like that, it's like, boy, it didn't even matter what cards I brought to the table because none of them resolved. My opponent just had it all on the crucial turns. But yeah, that is something you have to be prepared for when you face Teamer Rhinos, and that is Michael Lee advancing to 8-2 with one of the top decks in Modern, one that I certainly would not be surprised to have represented in the top 8 a couple of rounds from now.
So 10 power and 3 counter spells is a good recipe for victory, Reed? Is that what you're telling me?
Indeed, it is.
Okay, great. I'll take notes on that one. All right. So I believe we've hit time in the round. Thank you again for joining us for Laughing Dragons Modern 20K. Let's go to Anu. What do you have to say, Anurang?